The latest sports news, then at 7, The View from Washington in 100 days.
I'm Catty Kane, Washington.
I'm Christian Fraser in London.
Let's start with
the European Union, Brexit,
Russian interference,
Donald Trump's Twitter feed.
We'll
move on.
I think there are going to be a lot of questions now.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be fascinating to watch.
We're nearly out of time.
This is a big deal.
Beyond 100 days, Monday to Thursday, on the BBC News Channel.
The Brexit divorce. British and EU negotiators finally agree on proposals for how the UK should leave the European Union.
Is there a deal, Mr. Hancock? Do you think you'll be able to accept this deal?
The Prime Minister is calling in cabinet ministers one by one tonight to discuss the text before a full cabinet meeting tomorrow afternoon.
After months of doubts and difficulties, Theresa May's top team seems finally poised to agree a draft deal of how we leave the European Union.
We'll have all the latest reaction from Westminster and from Brussels, also tonight. More than 200 people are still missing after the deadliest wildfires in California's history. At least 44 people are known to have died. A sharp rise in the number of children being excluded from school. Most are coming from schools in poorer areas. We have a special report.
This is how the other side live, unfortunately, and that's a side that isn't shown. But we deal with it every single day.
The badger culling controversy. Now an independent report says it only has a modest effect on limiting the spread of TB to cattle. And putting words in your mouth, the battle to stop fake news. We find out just how easy it is to make footage false.
And coming up in Sports Day later in the hour on BBC News, Wayne Rooney defends his England return but admits that it's going to be strange to play for his country again.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. After months of negotiations and wrangling, there's been a significant breakthrough today after British and EU negotiators finally agreed on a draft text for how the United Kingdom will leave the EU next year. Cabinet ministers are being called in to see the Prime Minister one by one tonight to discuss the proposals before they are put before the full Cabinet tomorrow afternoon. They've also agreed an outline political declaration, effectively what our future relationship with the EU will look like after we leave. Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, is in Westminster for us tonight with the latest. Laura.
Well, Sophie, it's more than 2 years since that referendum made the national decision to leave the European Union. Theresa May has had to cope with a divided cabinet, a divided Tory party and daily disagreements with Brussels. But now, at last, the cabinet has in front of them a draft agreement of our divorce with the European Union. These are 24 hours now of huge opportunity, but huge danger for the Prime Minister too. Our first report tonight contains some flash photography.
Do you think a deal's within reach that you could sign up to?
Agreement is finally in Number 10's grasp. A document that's been the source of dispute for so long. At last, the plans, the compromises will go before the Cabinet tomorrow. And then we'll know whether they approve the divorce with the EU in all our names.
Well, we're obviously working hard on this final phase of the negotiation, this final stage. I think we should remain positive on getting a good deal for our country and taking our country forward and looking beyond Brexit and getting on with the job. So that's what we're doing.
But don't forget, many of the Cabinet have a less rosy view. Number 10 might struggle to get their wish to agree the so-called withdrawal agreement before autumn's out. Desperate to broker a pact at home and abroad by the end of the month.
Well, I think it's a step forward. There are clearly a number of hurdles to be gone through, and it appears that the government has got over the first of these by agreeing a text.
Chancellor, and you have the floor.
If Cabinet sign up, well then there's the rest of the EU to confirm. The German leader today still expressing regret that Brexit's happening at all. Great Britain's soon to leave, Angela Merkel said. This is a deep wound. But after a summit with the EU, the government faces the heavy toil of Parliament. A few dozen Tories and all the opposition parties are poised to vote against Theresa May's plan, almost whatever it is. And there is just no way that some Brexiteers will ever come on board.
For the first time in 1,000 years, this Parliament, will not have a say over the laws that govern this country. It is a quite incredible state of affairs. It will mean that we are having to accept rules and regulations from Brussels over which we have no say ourselves. It is utterly unacceptable to anybody who believes in democracy.
Remember, the Prime Minister has no majority on her own here, and there's no sign that Labour are willing to come to her aid.
Given the shambolic nature of the negotiations, this is unlikely to be a good deal for the country. Obviously we'll wait to see the detail, but we've made it clear on a number of occasions if it doesn't meet our test, we won't be voting for it.
Is there a deal, Mr Hancock?
Tonight, ministers have a chance to read through the hundreds of pages of legal text that will shape our country for years to come.
Are you confident you'll be able to get the Cabinet behind this?
If, and it is a big if, the Cabinet and then Parliament can actually agree.
Our Europe editor Katya Adler is in Brussels. We'll speak to her in a moment, but first to Laura in Westminster. And as you say there, this is by no means a done deal, is it? There's still a very, very long way to go.
There is. I mean, the government has today moved forward a significant step. There's no question about that. But cabinet ministers in the last 24 hours have told me privately they don't believe what might be on the table tomorrow will be acceptable. Some even suggesting that Theresa May should walk away there rather than accept the terms. We'll see tomorrow whether any of them have the courage of what they say privately actually to reject the deal or to quit their jobs if they really hate it that much. I think that is unlikely, although at this stage it is not impossible. But after that, Theresa May would have to get rubber stamping from the rest of the European Union formally at a summit in a couple of weeks or so. And then the battle royal, taking this deal through the Houses of Parliament, where we know there's already been an eruption of resistance from those Brexiteers. And remember, Theresa does not have a majority in the House of Commons on her own. And at this stage, we just can't know if the meaningful vote on a Brexit deal will be pulling off what has at times seemed politically impossible, or a vote that goes the wrong way for the Prime Minister that sinks the government and her career.
And Katya Adler in Brussels, what has been the reaction to this news there?
Well, Sophie, muted, if not almost silent. This doesn't mean, of course, that nothing's going on. It means that those in the know just don't want to speak publicly at the moment. I mean, one of my contacts actually sent me an emoji, Sophie, with a closed zipper instead of a mouth. So what do we think we know? Well, we think that at a technical level, so between EU and UK negotiators, there has been some kind of mutual understanding. This does not mean that a deal has actually been done. Earlier in the day, we heard from the first Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. He said that progress is definitely being made, but that we're actually not there yet. The 27 EU ambassadors meet here in Brussels tomorrow. Now, they were always scheduled to meet, but there is a sense of excitement, something going on, because the timing of that meeting is being moved. They might be told that decisive progress is being made now in these negotiations. The choreography is unclear, but what you need to remember, Sophie, it's not just the UK cabinet that has to approve any technical deal, if you like, but also every single EU member state will want to pore over it in detail.
Katya Adler in Brussels, Laura Kuenssberg in Westminster. Thank you both. Behind brands such as Bisto, Oxo and Mr Kipling says it's going to start stockpiling raw materials in case there are delays at ports after Brexit. Premier Foods said it has to prepare because of a lack of certainty over arrangements for the UK's departure from the EU next March. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson is here. They're really that worried then?
Well, the company was stressing today that this was just a precautionary measure, that only around 15% of its raw materials comes from the EU, but in the last few weeks it has decided to start stockpiling some ingredients and packaging. For instance, dried egg powder and those Mr. Kipling cakes, bottle tops, and this will mean tying up some £10 million in working capital. In other words, that's money that the company has to pay up front. And it says it might start stockpiling some finished food products in the new year. Now, Premier Foods is one of our biggest food manufacturers, and it was updating investors today on its Brexit plans as it announced its half-year results. But there are a lot of other companies right now at a crunch point. They want to know what to do with their supply chains and making investment decisions. They still haven't got certainty tonight.
Emma Simpson, thank you. Wages rose at their fastest pace in nearly a decade between July and September. New figures show an increase of 3.2%, the biggest rise since the end of 2008. However, the Office for National Statistics warns that real wage growth was below the 2015 level. A man has been charged with murder after a heavily pregnant woman was killed with a crossbow in East London yesterday. The 50-year-old man who was arrested at the scene appeared in court this afternoon. The 35-year-old woman was attacked at her home in Ilford. Richard Lister joins us from there, and incredibly, doctors have managed to save her baby.
They have indeed, Sophie, yes. A little boy was delivered safely by caesarean section, though tragically, of course, his mother, 35-year-old Sana Mohammed, who was 8 months pregnant, did not survive. Now, police were called to this address here in Newbury Park at about 7:40 yesterday morning. There they found Mrs. Mohammed gravely injured, having been apparently shot in the stomach with a crossbow. Now, they arrested a 50-year-old man at the scene, Ramanoj Umathalagadu, who is apparently, say police, known to Mrs. Mohammed. Here he has appeared before magistrates charged with her murder. He'll appear before the Old Bailey on Thursday. Now, Mrs. Mohammed's husband, Imtiaz, and their 5 children were also at this address, but managed to escape harm. Mr. Mohammed has spoken of being heartbroken at the loss of his wife, though their little baby is in a stable condition. Sophie.
Richard, thank you. Around 200 people are still missing in California after the worst wildfires in the state's history. 44 people are now known to have died, but that death toll is expected to rise. The fires have broken out across the state. More than 7,000 homes and other buildings have been destroyed. President Trump has declared it a major disaster. Most of the people who died were here in and around the town of Paradise, which has largely been destroyed. From California, Dave Lee reports.
It's been 5 days since the flames ripped through here, taking everything. For the people that were able to make it out of Paradise and into safety, an excruciating wait. This woman was trying to find out what had happened to her brothers.
He's an amputee, but he's a tough little brother, and I just like to tell him I love them both very much.
The harrowing process of trying to find and identify bodies here has now begun. Search teams think it could take many weeks. What will also take time is fully understanding what happened here and why this fire was able to get so out of control.
It's almost impossible to imagine how it must have felt to see the flames get closer and closer until there was no longer hope.
I want to recover as many remains as we possibly can, as soon as we possibly can, because I understand the toll that it takes on people not knowing what became of their loved ones.
It just came through so quickly.
For those who did make it out, like this nurse, tales of an incredible escape.
Fire was coming on both sides. It was a fire tornado in that canyon, and all of a sudden my cab filled up with total black smoke. It made me realize how close I came to losing my life.
500 miles south of where we are, there are rare glimmers of good news. Some of those evacuated in the south have been allowed to return to their homes, or at least what may be left of them. There is no such prospect for the people of what was once known as Paradise. Dave Lee, BBC News in Northern California.
The time is almost 6:15. Our top story this evening. Cabinet ministers are called into Downing Street to discuss the Brexit divorce after negotiators agree draft proposals. And still to come, we'll be down on the farm to assess the latest report into the link between badgers and bovine TB.
Coming up on Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on BBC News, there's a hero's return for Lewis Hamilton, and the five-time Formula One champion says he can get even better.
There's been a sharp rise in the number of exclusions from classrooms, with most happening in schools in poorer areas. School exclusions have gone up by 43% in the last 4 years in England. Nearly 50,000 pupils are now taught in alternative provision schools, which provide education for pupils outside mainstream education. Research by the BBC shows a 71% rise in temporary exclusions in the most deprived areas of England in the last 4 years. That's 4 times the rate in the least deprived areas. The Department for Education says every child should benefit from a high-quality education and equal opportunity, regardless of their background. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has spent a week in an independent alternative provision school in Manchester.
Learn objective in the usual box.
The number of children excluded from deprived schools is soaring. Many end up in places like this.
Get down off the desk.
Alternative provision.
Can you count how many times you're excluded?
Lost track.
Terrain, superb.
Got told I'd be here for 6 weeks, and I've been here for 6 months now, so...
Girls, come on, English.
You name the safeguarding issues, we've got them tenfold. Drugs is an influence, alcohol's an influence, gangs are an influence. We're dealing with challenging young people. That is the reality.
Lower bay, upstairs, please.
Harper Hay Alternative Provision School
Throw a dig.
educates some of Manchester's most vulnerable children.
We've got self-harmers. We've got people who are extremely volatile, people who are, for 80% of the time, can be angelic, but then 20% of the time, highly dangerous.
Most told us they'd repeatedly been given fixed-term exclusions.
From here, I've been excluded about 7 times, and then in my other one, I got excluded about more than, I can't even count.
List the things that happened that led to you being excluded.
Fighting, swearing at teachers.
We've learned fixed-term exclusions in the top 10% most deprived schools in England have increased by 70% over the last 4 years. 4 times the rate of the least deprived.
This is a Key Stage 3 mix, so you're going to have anything from 11 to 13, 14.
Adam's training on the job to become a qualified teacher. And this is one of the school's most challenging classes.
How behind are they? Some of them do 3 or 4 years, some of them more. 4 years behind. Potentially so.
These pupils desperately need his help. They're distracted, on their phone, and arguing.
Just take 5 minutes. We'll get you in 5 minutes.
It's too much for 14-year-old Cameron.
Why did you remove yourself?
Everyone was arguing, it gets too loud.
In just 10 minutes, the teaching inside the classroom comes to an end.
Do you feel like you're learning?
Yeah, but I want to go back to my old school because I want better education and stuff. Kids who misbehave, stop the learning.
To send these children here, schools pay £12,000 of a place in mainstream.
The initial damage was done by a child.
An independent school, rated as inadequate.
To get the resources together to get that covered. And
the head teacher told us they needed more money, more resources.
That needs ripping out. Funding's not available at the minute. Looking at grammar schools getting support from central government, and it's important to recognise the other side of that.
Shutting the door now.
Every day, the school manages difficult situations.
I don't know, I think it's English.
48 kids, 6 qualified teachers. When we filmed in the last week of term, 2 were off sick.
The children in this classroom now without a teacher, and they've been like that for more than 10 minutes.
Many here have complex needs. This pupil didn't appear to speak English, but the school said he could understand some words.
Should he be here?
Probably not. His home school placed him here. The issue with that child is, whilst he's got a language barrier, he's also got additional learning needs, which haven't fully been established yet.
Afton is in charge of pastoral care. In crisis, many children turn to her.
What's the reality of the backgrounds of these kids?
It's very, very, very sad. When they've come into school, they've been absolutely shattered. You know, they were sleeping rough.
We put a bed up for them, just so that they could have a good kip, and fed them, watered them.
And there's a growing risk from gangs, violence and drugs.
Spice, we've had kids collapse from Spice. Went white as a ghost and collapsed to the floor. Weed, cocaine, pills.
Have you seen children coming in with knives?
Yeah, I have. A knife, not that big. We dealt with it immediately, obviously. This is how the other side live, unfortunately, and that's a side that isn't shown. But we deal with it every single day.
The mission here is to work alongside mainstream schools to keep kids in education. So when they do lose control, the fallout is carefully managed.
Read through this extract here.
And pupils like McCaden can learn.
Everyone should get education the same way.
As other kids?
Yeah.
Do you feel you deserve that as much as other kids?
Sometimes.
30 seconds to go.
Time and time again, pupils told us this school was making a difference.
We still all deserve the education like everybody else, and I think we get it better here than most people do mainstream.
What's this school giving you?
You get a second chance.
Without this, what will happen to you?
Would have no education.
Get a few calculations done here.
Better than mainstream.
What do you think?
Where long periods were spent educated in isolation rooms.
You've got to look at one wall.
I think it's about like a month in there at one point.
Some days there'd be 11 of us, 10 of us.
Confined places. We just sit there and do nothing all day.
If you put too much flour on, you're going to dry the dough out.
The reality is that last year, less than 1 in 2 children in alternative provision schools received a C or above in GCSE maths and English. And each permanently excluded child is estimated to cost taxpayers £370,000 in lifetime education, benefits, healthcare and criminal justice costs.
What's your message if people say, do you know what, this is just a DOS and these kids shouldn't be here?
I really challenge that notion. We've got students that come back to us 2-3 years down the line, come and shake our hands. Thank you for turning my life around. That student might have left us with 3 GCSEs. Pretty poor grades, but we've helped turn the life around. That is progress, that is success. And if we're not doing that, who else is going to do it?
Ed is with me now. Really challenging for the staff there. Why did they let you film there, though?
Well, this was just one example of alternative provision, but the owner wanted us to come inside to see the challenge of teaching children in poorer areas, but also the benefits of taking children outside of mainstream education. The Department for Education says it wants all young people to receive an education that fosters ambition, no matter the background. But Sophie, it's clear from our findings that a disproportionate number of children from deprived areas are being excluded.
Ed Thomas, thank you. To badger culling now, and an independent review has found that it only has a modest effect in reducing the spread of TB to cattle. The report suggests cattle actually play a bigger role in passing it on. John Kay reports.
They seem fine, but look closely. The small green ear tags show these cattle have TB.
So these cows here tested positive.
24 of Rob Harrison's dairy herd have just been diagnosed. It's the worst outbreak he's ever known.
This disease is devastating. To have a healthy, functioning dairy and beef industry, we need to control this disease like we do any other disease. And it's just got out of control over the last 30, 40 years.
Many farmers blame badgers for spreading TB. So a cull began in 2013 in Gloucestershire and Somerset. It's now been widened to 32 different zones. Overall, it's estimated more than 34,000 badgers have been killed. Today's independent review says badger culls can have a modest effect in reducing TB in cattle, but it says killing more wild animals will cost millions and may not be acceptable to the public.
A large section of people believe that one should just not do that, and another sector feel equally passionately that one should do. Science, unfortunately, cannot distinguish between those two options, and inevitably has to be made by ministers.
So what happens now? Well, the government is due to give its response next summer. In the meantime, the various badger culls will continue as planned. And it's worth pointing out that today's review is based on trials that were carried out more than 10 years ago. It's not based on the current badger cull programme. Today's report says we also need to look at vaccinations, testing and how farms are managed, as well as how TB can be passed between cattle. Rob's infected cows have now been isolated and will be destroyed. John Kay, BBC News, Gloucestershire.
And finally, fake news. It is a global problem. How do you know what is true and what's not? As part of the BBC's Beyond Fake News season, we look at how misinformation is spread. Here's our media editor, Amol Rajan.
The hit BBC drama Luther has been sold around the world. But the dubbing used for international versions rather removes the subtlety of the original.
I charged one and let the other one off.
Henry Madsen est sorti du coma.
Nicht so schön für Sie.
Hanno paura che mi avvicini furtivamente e finisca il lavoro.
Algorithms figuring out where is the eyes, where is the mouth.
In a rented space in North London, young entrepreneurs are using artificial intelligence to improve the viewing experience. Their software understands and rapidly models the intricacies of the face.
So I grew up in Denmark, which is a very small country, 5 million people, which means that we're too small for anyone to want to dub content. So I grew up on subtitles. And while I'm accustomed to subtitles today, it does take away a certain element of the experience.
Victor, how do we make sure that this technology is used for its commercial benefits rather than through its political dangers?
I think it's very important that you have good actors in this space that understand the technology, that can help shape it, both from sort of a public awareness perspective, but also very much in developing safety mechanisms to ensure that it's not used for bad.
Let me give you an example of how this AI technology can be used. So for instance, I might say, my name's Amol Rajan, I love reggae music, and my favourite band is The Wailers. But how about I say that again, in Vietnamese, not a language I speak as it happens.
Tên tôi là Amol Rajan, tôi thích nhạc reggae, tôi thích nhất là The Wailers. Tôi nghĩ họ là ban nhạc tuyệt vời nhất trong lịch sử.
Or what if I made a mistake and wanted to change my words? Rather than reshoot the whole sequence, I could use the same clip but reanimate the pictures matching my voice from a separate bit of filming. My name's Amol Rajan, I love opera, my favourite composer is Wagner, I find his music uplifting and a challenge to listen to. But in the age of information overload, truth can be hard to find.
When you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead. Mr. President.
Last week, the White House shared a video of Donald Trump's confrontation with a CNN reporter, which the network claimed had been modified. CNN say it had been manipulated by conspiracy theorists who support the president. What if concerns over fake news, such as these posts on Facebook, are but nothing compared to the potential harm from fake video?
People will not be able to trust the truth. They won't be able to tell what is real, what is not real. And in some cases, they may be faced with reports that are real, but they won't trust them.
A war for the truth is raging in our media today. And while this technology will make television better, it could make already fragile democracies much worse. Amol Rajan, BBC News.
And you can find out much more about the issues surrounding fake news online at bbc.co.uk/fake news. Time now for a look at the weather. Susan Powell is here.
Good evening, Sophie. Some really real sunshine across the UK today, as opposed to yesterday when it was interspersed with some hefty showers with some wide expanses of blue sky. Through the afternoon, though, the cloud has started to thicken a little bit from the west, and that is heralding the arrival of a weather system that will bring some rain into the north and west by the end of the night tonight. But to the south and east, the skies will stay pretty clear. So for the remainder of the evening, if you're heading out, it is a largely dry picture, although in a couple of hours we will see some rain heading into Northern Ireland. It'll briefly glance into Wales through the small hours of Wednesday, spread across Northern England too, and by the end of the night it's going to be looking pretty wet across Scotland, aside from the far north where clearer skies will make for a slightly cooler night Elsewhere, though, with the breeze, with the cloud, a mild night, temperatures in double figures for many of us. To the south, certainly the best of the sunshine first thing tomorrow morning, but as the day goes on, that sunshine will creep its way further north. After a wet start, dry and bright for the afternoon for Wales and Northern England. Northern Ireland and Scotland always stuck with a bit more cloud, but drier prospects certainly through the second half of the day. Even if it is quite misty and murky as well, it will be very mild. We should see a few breaks, I think, around the Moray Firth, and their temperatures could get up to 17 degrees Celsius. For the remainder of the week, we will keep the mild weather. The story is going to settle down, though, quite considerably, so we'll lose those weather fronts pushing into the north and west. High pressure will come to dominate, a lot of dry weather, but I think our talking point as we go through this weekend and into next week will be some stubborn areas of cloud and some lingering patches of fog, and the fact that it will just start to feel significantly colder, I think, by the middle of next week. Sophie.
Susan, thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news team where you are. Bye-bye.
Stories set to shape the news agenda. Headlines freshly written. Original perspectives on the day's unfolding narratives. See the bigger picture as it emerges. The Papers, weeknights at 10:40 on the BBC News Channel.
Our small island continues to reveal an epic history.
We can be there for every exciting moment of discovery.
An extraordinary monument as old as Stonehenge.
It's been a real roller coaster.
A vast hoard of ancient coins.
Everyone is hiding their money.
And a radically different view of our barbarian ancestors.
You've had a facial reconstruction done.
Where the very latest discoveries are changing history.
Welcome to Digging for Britain.
Coming soon on BBC 4.